The evening sky above the city glowed with soft golden lights, the streets around the Grand Hotel buzzing with the sound of engines, footsteps, and excited chatter. For tonight was the night of the most glamorous charity gala of the year. Limousines pulled up one after another, releasing elegantly dressed guests who stepped onto the long red carpet that stretched to the glittering entrance. Photographers lined both sides, their cameras clicking endlessly, flashes bursting like tiny fireworks. This was not just an event, it was a spectacle that millions of people would watch on live television and countless more would see through social media. Inside the hotel, the ballroom was decorated like a dream. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, scattering warm light over the crowd. Tables draped in white and gold cloth stood in neat rows, each centerpiece a carefully arranged bouquet of roses and lilies. Waiters moved silently with silver trays, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres to guests who laughed and greeted one another as if they had known each other for years, even if they had just met. Every corner of the room was filled with a hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the occasional burst of applause as someone spotted a famous face. Among the night's most anticipated arrivals was Keanu Reeves, a man known not only for his acting but for his quiet humility and kindness. The news channels had already announced that he would be attending to support the children's hospital that the gala was raising funds for. Reporters whispered eagerly about his presence, and some guests even admitted they had come just for the chance to meet him or at least catch a glimpse. Amelia stood near the entrance, adjusting the silver bracelet on her wrist and glancing every few seconds toward the red carpet. She was not a famous actress or singer, but she was an influencer with a decent following online. Her presence at the gala had been secured through a sponsorship arrangement with a luxury brand that lent her the gown. She wore tonight a shimmering emerald dress that caught the light beautifully whenever she moved. She had been planning this night for weeks, carefully imagining how she might make a moment that people would notice. She had posted her getting ready photos earlier in the evening, her makeup perfect, her hair styled into soft waves, her caption hinting at something unforgettable to come. In her mind, tonight was an opportunity, a rare one, to turn herself from a social media figure into a name that news outlets would remember. As Keanu finally stepped onto the carpet, the noise around Amelia grew louder. Guests turned their heads, photographers leaned forward, and reporters raised their microphones. Keanu, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, smiled politely and waved to the crowd, his calm, almost shy demeanor contrasting with the energy around him. He stopped to speak with a few reporters, his voice steady and humble as he thanked the organizers for supporting the hospital. Amelia's heart raced as she saw him approaching. She told herself this was her moment, the kind of moment that could get her face onto every trending topic online. She thought about how people loved unpredictable, bold acts, things that made them laugh or gasp. She stepped forward slightly, ready to intercept him as he passed. Her mind worked quickly. A funny comment, a playful gesture, something to get a reaction. She had no plan beyond the desire to be seen. The air was electric as Keanu came closer, the crowd's energy rising with each step he took. Cameras pointed in his direction, microphones angled to catch every word. Amelia could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, the lights from the cameras making everything seem sharper, brighter. In that instant, she wasn't thinking about consequences, or how her actions might be perceived by millions of strangers watching from home. She only thought about being part of the moment, about leaving a mark. Her fingers tightened slightly around the strap of her clutch bag. The distance between them was closing quickly. She took a small step forward, feeling the eyes of nearby guests on her. Keanu's expression was calm, his eyes warm but focused on greeting the crowd. The sound of camera shutters was constant, every second immortalizing this evening in thousands of photographs. This was it, the moment Amelia had been waiting for. She didn't know that in the next few seconds, her life would take a sharp turn. One she could never have imagined, and that the entire world would be there to witness it. The moment seemed to slow down as Keanu walked past her, his calm presence almost making Amelia hesitate. But then, driven by a sudden rush of adrenaline, she leaned a little toward him and raised her hand. She meant to make a light-hearted gesture, something playful, something that would make the cameras catch her in the same frame as him. But her hand connected with his arm harder than she had intended, and the sound of the contact was sharper than she could have imagined. A small but audible gasp went through the people standing closest. The slap echoed slightly in the space, picked up clearly by the microphones held by reporters nearby. Keanu stopped mid-step, his body stiffening for a fraction of a second. He didn't flinch away, and he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he turned his head and looked at her with an expression that was calm but unreadable. The photographers didn't waste a second. Camera flashes exploded around them like bursts of lightning. From every angle, pictures were taken of Amelia's. Hands still slightly raised, Keanu's still figure, the expressions of those around them ranging from surprise to discomfort. The red carpet, which had moments before been filled with laughter and friendly chatter, now felt tense. In that instant, Amelia realized she had made a mistake. It wasn't the playful, attention-grabbing moment she had imagined. Something about Keanu's silence, about the way he simply looked at her without reacting, made her feel exposed in a way that was far from glamorous. But before she could say anything, before she could even lower her hand completely, she heard the murmur of voices behind her growing louder. Did she just hit him? Someone whispered. What was that for? Another voice muttered. Keanu, showing no sign of anger, simply gave a small, polite nod, then turned his attention back to the reporters. He answered a few more questions in his calm, low voice, as though nothing had happened, and then continued down the carpet toward the ballroom. But the cameras hadn't missed it, and neither had the audience watching the live broadcast. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, a journalist's phone buzzed. A notification flashed across the screen. Keanu Reeves slapped at Gala, video trending. It had been less than 2 minutes since the moment happened, but clips were already being uploaded to social media. Amelia felt a strange mix of heat and cold spreading through her body. She tried to laugh it off with the guests around her, making a joke about just saying hello in my own way, but their reactions were hesitant. A few gave her a polite smile, but most simply turned their attention back to the main event. She could feel the invisible shift, that moment when people stop seeing you as part of the evening's beauty and start seeing you as a disruption. As she made her way into the ballroom, the weight of what had happened began to sink in. Guess. She didn't know were looking at her, some whispering to each other, others openly curious. Every few steps, she caught the faint glow of phone screens, showing the very moment she wished she could take back. Across the room, Keanu was already speaking to the event organizers, his calm demeanor unchanged, his focus still on the cause they were all here to support. That only made her feel more uneasy. She had expected some kind of reaction, annoyance, anger, even a sharp comment, but instead, his quiet professionalism made her actions stand out even more. By the time she reached her assigned table, her phone was buzzing non-stop. At first, she thought it might be friends reacting to her red carpet appearance, maybe even cheering her for being bold. But when she finally glanced at the screen, her stomach tightened. Messages from people she hadn't spoken to in months were popping up. Some were asking, what happened with Keanu? While others were bluntly saying, this doesn't look good. Curious and nervous, she opened her social media app. There it was, the clip of her hand meeting Keanu's arm, played in slow motion, repeated over and over, with captions ranging from unbelievable to disrespect at a charity event. Thousands of comments were already under it, and the numbers were climbing fast. Some people defended her, saying it might have been a joke or a misunderstanding. But far more were angry, calling her rude, attention-seeking, and entitled. Her name, paired with Keanu's, was trending in multiple countries. People she didn't know were making quick edits of the video, adding dramatic music or sarcastic captions. Back at her table, Amelia sat stiffly, pretending to listen to the conversations around her while her mind spun. She tried to focus on the speeches, the auction, the charity performances. But she could feel the stares from a few tables away. She could almost hear the unspoken questions. Why did she do that? Who even is she? And somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered the truth she didn't want to admit. The night was no longer about the cause. No longer about the beautiful dress, the celebrities, or even her plan to be noticed. The night had already shifted into something else entirely. A single moment, just a few seconds long, had taken control of the story, and she had no idea how far it would spread by morning. She didn't know it yet, but the fallout had already begun. By the time the gala ended and Amelia stepped out into the cool night air, the world around her had already changed, though she didn't fully realize it yet. The music from the ballroom still echoed faintly in her ears, the scent of flowers and perfume lingering in her hair. But something felt heavier now. The photographers outside were still there, but instead of smiling at her, they were speaking quietly among themselves. Some even glancing at their phone screens as if checking updates. A few cameras clicked as she walked past, but the energy was different. Her driver opened the car door for her, and she slid into the back seat. The moment the door closed, she pulled out her phone, expecting to see a few new followers and maybe some funny comments from friends about her big moment on the red carpet. But as soon as the screen lit up, her stomach tightened. The notification bar was full, not with likes, but with hundreds of comments, tags, and private messages. Curious and a little uneasy, she opened her most recent post, the one from earlier that evening, showing her in the emerald dress before leaving for the gala. The comment section was no longer full of compliments about her outfit. Instead, the top comments read, "Why did you hit Keanu Reeves? This is disgusting. Totally uncalled for. Who even are you to touch him like that?" Scrolling down, she saw the same short clip posted over and over again, her hand making contact with Keanu's arm, the sharp sound of it, the cameras flashing, and his still, quiet reaction. Some videos slowed the moment down, adding captions like "unprovoked" or "the look on his face says everything." Others added dramatic music, turning it into a meme. And every single one was racking up thousands of views in minutes. Amelia's heart sank. This wasn't how she had imagined it. She had pictured herself trending as the bold girl who made Keanu laugh, not as the rude influencer who slapped him for no reason. She switched to her messaging app. Her closest friend had texted her, "What happened? People are going crazy." Another message from a fellow influencer said, "Girl, delete your socials now before it gets worse." Her sponsorship manager had left a voicemail asking her to call back. Urgently in the morning, the car moved slowly through the city traffic, the lights outside blurring through the tinted windows. Amelia leaned back in her seat, feeling heat rise in her face. She tried to think of ways to explain it. Maybe she could post that it was a misunderstanding, that she was just joking, that she meant no harm. But every version of the explanation sounded weak in her head, and she knew the internet didn't like waiting for explanations. Once it decided on a story, it spread like wildfire. By the time she reached her apartment, the story had already made its way onto major celebrity gossip sites. She opened one article and saw the headline in bold, "Influencer strikes Keanu Reeves at charity gala. Fans outraged." The article quoted tweets from angry viewers, some calling for her to be banned from public events, others demanding she apologize immediately. It even included a side-by-side photo of her smiling before the slap and Keanu's expression afterward, making the contrast painfully clear. She tossed her phone onto the couch and walked to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water, but her hands were trembling so much that the glass almost slipped. She couldn't stop thinking about how fast this had happened. Just hours ago, she had been standing under crystal chandeliers, imagining this night as the highlight of her career. Now, it felt like the beginning of the end. She picked up her phone again, hoping things had calmed down. But the notifications had only grown. Hashtags with her name were trending, not the glamorous kind she had once dreamed of, but hashtags mocking her, accusing her, even creating parodies of her moment. Some people were digging through her old posts, looking for anything they could use to paint her as a bad person. In one post from months ago, where she had complained about bad service at a restaurant, people were leaving comments like, "Of course she did this to Keanu. Look at her attitude here." In another, where she was holding a drink at a party, someone had commented, "You can tell she's the type to cause drama for attention." It didn't matter that most of these posts had nothing to do with what happened tonight. People were building a version of her they wanted to believe, and that version was the villain of the story. Amelia sat on the couch in silence, her mind racing. She thought about deleting her social media accounts, but part of her was afraid that would make her look guilty. She thought about posting a statement, but she didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like an excuse. And then she saw it. A clip of Keanu leaving the gala, shaking hands with fans outside, smiling politely, and saying nothing about the incident. That somehow made everything worse. His silence was being praised online as classy and dignified, while her moment was being picked apart frame by frame. The difference between their images couldn't be more stark. He was the calm, humble hero, and she was the reckless attention seeker. It was like watching the internet write a movie where she was cast as the villain, and she had no control over the script. As the clock passed midnight, Kizé realized something important. This wasn't just going to disappear overnight. The story had already taken on a life of its own, and the more she thought about it, the more she feared that tomorrow would be worse. The internet never slept, and neither, she suspected, would she? The next morning, Amelia woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing nonstop. Her eyes were heavy from barely sleeping, and her body felt like she had been carrying something heavy all night. She reached for her phone, hoping that maybe things had calmed down while she was asleep. But the moment she saw her lock screen, she knew it had only gotten worse. Her name was still trending, but now the headlines were harsher. News channels had picked up the story, showing the clip of her hitting Keanu over and over again. They invited celebrity experts, body language analysts, and random online commentators to discuss the disrespect at a charity event. Some were calling her the girl who ruined the gala. Others said she had embarrassed herself beyond repair. The more she scrolled, the more her stomach turned. Her sponsorship manager had left 3 more voicemails. The first one was short. "We need to talk." The second was firmer. "Brands are pulling out. We need an official statement today." The third was almost desperate. "If you don't get ahead of this now, it's going to destroy everything." Amelia knew she couldn't stay silent. She decided she had to post an apology video, hoping it would calm people down. She opened her front-facing camera and positioned herself in front of a white wall in her living room. She thought about putting on light makeup to look more put together, but then decided it might make her seem fake. She also debated smiling to show warmth, but it felt wrong. This wasn't a moment for smiles. After several deep breaths, she hit record. Her voice was soft as she began. "Hi everyone. I just want to address what happened last night." She explained that she had meant it as a playful gesture, that she didn't intend to hurt or disrespect anyone, especially Keanu. She apologized to him, to the event organizers, and to anyone who was offended. She tried to keep her voice calm, but her hands were trembling slightly. When she finished, she watched the video back. It seemed fine to her, sincere enough, short, and to the point. She uploaded it to all her platforms and waited. For a brief moment, she felt relieved, as if she had done something to fix the situation. But the reaction came fast. And it was not what she hoped for. People began commenting under the video within minutes. Many didn't believe her apology was genuine. They pointed out how her background looked staged, how her hair and makeup were still perfect. Some accused her of fake crying because her voice shook but no tears fell. Others took screenshots of her slightly smiling in one frame and posted it with captions like, "This is not regret, this is damage control." Worse, people started digging deeper. Old tweets from years ago were suddenly resurfacing. Posts where she had made sarcastic jokes or complained about trivial things. They were being used as evidence that she was self-centered and disrespectful. The internet wasn't just reacting to last night anymore. It was building a complete case against her character by afternoon. Reaction videos were everywhere. Popular YouTubers and TikTok creators were making content mocking her apology. Some replayed her video side by side with the slap clip, laughing at the difference in energy. Others broke it down frame by frame, pointing out every detail they thought proved she was insincere. Amelia watched one of these videos in disbelief. A stranger who had never met her was confidently telling thousands of viewers what kind of person she was, based entirely on a 10-second clip and a 1-minute apology. She wanted to scream that they were wrong, that they didn't know her. But she also knew that anything she posted now would probably make things worse. Then the sponsorship manager called again. This time, Amelia answered. His voice was tense, but controlled. "Amelia, 3 of your biggest contracts have dropped you. They don't want to be associated with this kind of publicity. You need to understand, this isn't about whether it was a joke or not. It's about perception, and right now, the public sees you as a problem." Hearing those words out loud hit her harder than the online comments. This wasn't just about people being angry, it was about her career, her income, her future. She asked if there was anything she could do to change their minds, but the answer was quick. Not right now. You have to let this die down, but that means staying quiet for a while. Staying quiet felt impossible. Every time she picked up her phone, there was more. Another news article, another thread, another meme. People she had worked with in the past were unfollowing her. Friends who had always liked her posts were suddenly silent. The apartment that had felt bright and full of promise when she moved in now felt like a cage. That night, as she sat on the couch with the TV on mute, Amelia realized that the internet didn't just react, it fed on moments like this. The more she tried to explain herself, the more material she gave them to pick apart. And the worst part was, she couldn't make people see the truth if they had already decided who she was in their minds. The apology had been her attempt to fix things. But now, it felt like pouring water on a fire that only made the smoke thicker. She had tried to show sincerity, but all anyone saw was performance. And somewhere out there, Keanu was continuing his life without a single public word about the incident, which only made the contrast between them sharper. As midnight approached, again, she put her phone face down and stared at the ceiling. The noise outside was gone, but the noise online was louder than ever. She wondered how much more of herself she would lose before the world moved on to its next target. The days that followed felt like one long, heavy blur for Amelia. Morning and night blended together because she barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the moment on the red carpet, the sound of her hand hitting Keanu's arm, the flash of the cameras, the quick, unreadable look on his face. She wished she could go back and erase those seconds from existence. But the world had already recorded them from every angle. Her phone was still buzzing constantly. But now, most of the notifications weren't from her followers. They were from news alerts, gossip blogs, and strangers tagging her in angry posts. She stopped opening most of them. The few times she did, she only found more people making fun of her or calling her names. Then the calls started, not from friends checking in, but from her sponsorship manager. His tone had changed completely from the early days of her career. It was no longer friendly or encouraging. It was sharp, short, and businesslike. "Amelia," he said on one call, "another brand just canceled. They're cutting all ties. With you." She tried to argue, telling him the moment had been blown out of proportion, but he cut her off. "It doesn't matter what really happened. They care about their image, and right now, your name is toxic." The words hit her like a punch. Toxic. She had never thought of herself that way. She had been the one smiling at parties, the one people invited for her energy, the one who brands wanted because she could make products look glamorous. Now, she was someone they didn't want to be seen with at all. It didn't stop there. More contracts ended. The luxury brand that had lent her the emerald dress for the gala emailed her, asking for it to be returned immediately. A travel company she had been scheduled to work with next month told her they were reevaluating their partnerships. But she knew what that really meant. Even her personal life began to feel different. Friends who used to text her daily were suddenly quiet. She saw them posting pictures at dinners and events she hadn't been invited to. A few sent short, awkward messages like, "Hope you're doing okay." But when she replied, the conversation would die quickly. It was as if her name had become something people didn't want to be too close to. One night, she decided to go out for a walk, thinking fresh air might help her clear her head. She kept her hood up, hoping not to be recognized. But as she passed a group of young people outside a cafe, she heard one of them whisper, "That's her." Another laughed softly and said, "The Keanu girl." She didn't look back. She just kept walking, her chest tightening. Back at home, she tried to distract herself by watching TV or reading. But her thoughts always drifted back to the same question. How did everything fall apart so fast? She had worked for years to build her image, her audience, her career. And in less than a week, it felt like all of it had been swept away. Money started to become a worry too. Without sponsorships, her main source of income was gone. She had savings, but they were meant for travel, future plans. Maybe even a home, not for surviving a complete career collapse. She made a list of expenses she could cut, but it only made her feel more trapped. One afternoon, she got an email from a small gossip magazine asking if she wanted to tell her side of the story for an exclusive interview. For a moment, she considered it. Maybe, if she explained herself fully, people would see the truth. But then she remembered how her apology video had been torn apart, how strangers had twisted her words. If she spoke again, they would probably do the same. Her apartment, once filled with clothes, makeup, and products from brands, now felt emptier. Boxes of returned items sat by the door. The walls felt closer somehow, the air heavier. She started avoiding mirrors because she didn't like the person looking back at her late at night. When the city outside was quiet, she would scroll through her old posts from before the gala. Smiling pictures at beaches, laughing with friends. At rooftop parties, holding awards from small influencer events. She remembered how confident she had felt then, how sure she was that her career was only going to grow. That version of herself felt like someone from another life. The worst part was the feeling that she couldn't escape it. Even if the trending topics moved on to someone else, the video would still exist online forever. Anytime someone searched her name, it would appear. She couldn't change that. A week after the gala, her sponsorship manager called again. This time, his voice was softer, almost pitying. "Amelia, I think you should take a break. Step away from social media. Stop. Posting for a while, let people forget." "But what if they never forget?" she asked quietly. There was a pause. Then he said, "Sometimes they don't. You just have to rebuild somewhere else. Somehow." When the call ended, Amelia sat in silence, the city lights flickering faintly. Through her window, she realized she had reached a point where she no longer had control over her image, her career, or even how people saw her as a person. And for the first time, she truly felt alone. She didn't know it yet. But in the middle of that loneliness, someone unexpected would soon reach out, and that would change everything. Amelia was lying on her couch, staring at the ceiling when the email arrived. She hadn't even been checking her inbox much anymore. Most of the new messages were either from brands cutting ties or from strangers sending cruel words. But this one stood out right away because of the subject line, "Message from Keanu. Reeves' office." For a moment, she thought it had to be fake. Maybe some internet troll pretending to be his assistant to make fun of her. She hesitated before opening it, her thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, curiosity won. The email was short and polite. It read, "Hello, Amelia. Mr. Reeves is aware of the recent incident and the attention it has received. He would like to speak with you privately at your convenience. If you are willing, please reply to this email so we can arrange a meeting. There is no press involved, and this will be entirely off the record." At the bottom was the name of his personal assistant. Along with contact details and a phone number, Amelia's heart began to race. Of all the possible messages she had imagined over the past week, this was not one of them. She read it 3 times, searching for some sign that it was a joke. But everything about it looked professional and real. Her first reaction was fear. What if Keanu was angry? What if this was his way of confronting her face to face? Or worse, what if he planned to make some kind of public statement after speaking to her? She pictured herself sitting in a room with him, stumbling over her words, looking even more foolish than she already did. But another part of her, the part that still respected and admired him, felt curious. Why would he want to meet her? Privately, if he was angry, he could have just ignored her entirely, as he had done in public since the incident. And deep down, she knew she wanted to face him. Even if it was uncomfortable, it took her almost an hour to type a simple reply. "Yes, I'm willing to meet. Please let me know when and where." She pressed send, her hands trembling. The assistant wrote back quickly. The meeting was set for the next afternoon in a quiet cafe in a part of the city that wasn't crowded with paparazzi. She was told to arrive alone. That night, Amelia barely slept. She kept imagining what she would say should she apologize. Again, should she explain what she had been thinking in that moment? Should she thank him for staying silent instead of adding to the public backlash? Each time she rehearsed her words, they came out awkward. The next day, she dressed simply in jeans and a plain sweater. No makeup beyond the basics, no jewelry, except her small silver bracelet. She wanted to look like herself. It's not like the influencer version of her that people online had been tearing apart. The cafe was small and warm, with soft music playing in the background and the smell of freshly baked bread drifting through the air. She spotted him instantly, sitting at a corner table wearing a dark jacket, his hair slightly messy. A cup of coffee in front of him. For a moment, she froze near the door. This was the first time she had been near him without flashing cameras and a noisy crowd. Here, he looked normal, kind, almost like someone you could talk to for hours about anything. When he saw her, he gave a small nod and stood up. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice calm, not sharp or accusing. She sat down across from him, her heart pounding. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," she began, her voice unsteady. He smiled faintly. "I thought it would be better to talk face to face. The internet. It's not always the best place for understanding." His words were gentle, but they hit her hard. She nodded quickly. "I'm so sorry for what happened that night. I didn't mean for it to come across the way it did. It was stupid, and I regret it every day." He listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he leaned back slightly and said, "I believe you didn't mean harm. But the world doesn't always care about intentions. They care about the story they see." Amelia felt her throat tighten. "That's exactly how it feels. Like I can't control the story anymore." He took a slow sip of his coffee before speaking again. "You can't always control how people see you, but you can control what you do next. That's what matters. You have a choice. You can spend all your time trying to fight the noise, or you can put your energy into something better, something real." She sat in silence, letting his words sink in. No one else had spoken to her like this since the incident. Not her manager, not her so-called friends. Everyone else either blamed her or avoided her. But here was the man she had embarrassed in front of millions, telling her that she still had a choice. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "Start small," he said simply. "Do something that matters to you, even if no one's watching. The rest will follow." They talked for a little while longer about the pressure of public life, about how mistakes can become magnified online, and about how easy it is for people to forget that there's a human being on the other side of the screen. When the meeting ended, he didn't offer her a handshake for the cameras or a staged photo. Instead, he just smiled warmly and said, "Take care of yourself." As she walked out of the cafe, the air felt different. For the first time in days, she felt a tiny spark of hope. The world outside might still see her as the villain of that one viral moment, but she now had a piece of advice she couldn't ignore: to stop chasing the story and start building a better one. And she didn't know it yet, but that meeting would be the first step in changing everything about the way she lived her life. Amelia left the cafe that day feeling lighter than she had in weeks. But the road ahead still looked uncertain. Keanu's words kept echoing in her mind. "Do something that matters to you, even if no one's watching." She thought about them the whole walk home. 'Twas simple advice, but it felt like something she had never truly done before. Most of her life in recent years had been about doing things because people were watching, because there was a camera, an audience, or a chance to be noticed. That night, she sat on her couch with a notebook in front of her. The TV was on mute, her phone face down on the table. She began to list things she actually cared about, not things that got her likes or sponsorships, but things that made her feel good inside. The first thing she wrote was animals. She had always loved them. As a teenager, she used to volunteer at a small animal shelter in her neighborhood before her life became about photo shoots and brand deals. She also wrote down helping children because her younger cousin had been born with a heart condition, and she remembered how much support her family had needed at that time. The next morning, she called the local animal shelter to ask if they needed help. The woman on the phone sounded surprised but happy. "We're always looking for volunteers. Can you come in tomorrow?" Amelia said yes before she could second-guess herself. When she arrived at the shelter, there were no photographers, no red carpet, no makeup artists. Just barking dogs, meowing cats, and a few tired-looking workers who greeted her warmly and handed her a pair of gloves. Her first task was cleaning kennels, something she hadn't done in years. At first, she felt awkward, worried someone might recognize her and judge her. But within minutes, she realized no one cared about her past here. They were too busy making sure the animals were fed, clean, and safe. The work was tiring, but strangely peaceful. By the end of the day, a small, nervous brown dog had started following her around. She learned his name was Max and that he had been abandoned. As she knelt down to pet him, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet sense of purpose. Over the next weeks, Amelia kept going back to the shelter. She also reached out to a children's hospital in the city, offering to help with fundraising events. It's the first time she walked into the hospital. She expected someone to bring up the incident, but no one did. Instead, they put her to work setting up chairs and organizing supplies. She didn't post about any of it online at first. Keanu's words reminded her that this was about doing something real, not about proving anything. But little by little, some people began to notice anyway. A volunteer from the shelter posted a picture of her cleaning kennels with a smile, saying, "Shout out to Amelia for helping us out every week." The comments under it were different from the ones she was used to, more forgiving, less harsh. A few people even wrote, "Maybe she's not as bad as we thought." Still, the road wasn't smooth. The viral video was still out there, and sometimes strangers would leave cruel comments under unrelated posts. But Amelia stopped reading most of them. She was too busy to spend hours scrolling through hate. Her days now had real schedules: mornings at the shelter, afternoons helping organize hospital events, evenings at home reading or cooking simple meals. One day, while packing gift bags for a hospital fundraiser, she overheard two other volunteers talking. "Is that the girl from one?" began, lowering her voice. "Yeah, I think so," the other replied. "But honestly, she's been great here. Always helps without complaining." Hearing that made Amelia smile. She didn't need everyone in the world to forgive her. Just knowing that the people who actually saw her work respected it was enough. As weeks turned into months, she started to feel more like herself again, though not the same self she had been before the gala. This version of her was quieter, less desperate for attention, and more careful about her actions. She didn't crave the spotlight anymore. She craved moments that felt real, like when Max, the dog, was finally adopted by a loving family, or when a child at the hospital laughed at a silly face she made while handing them a toy. One evening, after a long day, she sat by her window, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft pink and gold. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't thinking about what the internet thought of her. She was just there, breathing in the calm. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Keanu's assistant again. "Mr. Reeves asked me to check in. He hopes you're doing well." Amelia smiled and typed back a simple reply. "Please tell him I'm doing better, thanks to his advice." She didn't know if the world would ever fully forget what happened that night at the gala, but maybe that didn't matter anymore. She had started to build a life where she could wake up in the morning and feel good about the day ahead, even if no one else saw it. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a very different story. Months passed, and Amelia's life looked nothing like it had before the gala. The days of endless brand meetings, staged photo shoots, and chasing trends had faded into the background. Now her mornings started with the familiar sound of barking at the animal shelter or the cheerful greetings from the nurses at the children's hospital. She no longer woke up with that anxious feeling about checking her phone. In fact, she often left it on silent for hours. At first, she had thought her work at the shelter and hospital would remain unnoticed. But slowly, word began to spread. Not through flashy announcements or carefully planned posts, but through the quiet voices of people who had seen her in action. One afternoon, local journalist came to the shelter to write a story about pet adoptions. Amelia happened to be there, kneeling beside Max's old kennel, helping another shy dog learn to trust humans again. The journalist recognized her immediately. She could see it in his eyes, but instead of asking about the gala incident, he asked about the shelter's work and the challenges they faced. Amelia spoke honestly, keeping the focus on the animals. But her sincerity caught his attention. When the article was published, it mentioned her name briefly, noting her volunteer work without dragging up the past. For once, her name was in the news for something good. At the hospital, the changes were even more personal. The children knew her simply as Miss Amelia, the one who brought art supplies, read them stories, or played silly games to make them laugh. She wasn't the influencer from the headlines here. She was just someone who showed up and cared. Parents would thank her quietly, sometimes with tears in their eyes, telling her she had made their child's day a little brighter. One Saturday, during a hospital charity event, a woman approached her. Amelia recognized her as the mother of a boy she had spent time with over the past month. The woman hesitated, then said softly, "I know who you are. I saw what happened online. But I also see what you've been doing here. Whatever people say, I think you're trying to be better." The words stayed with Amelia. She had stopped hoping for the world's forgiveness, but hearing it from even one person felt like a step forward. Online, things began to shift in small ways. The constant stream of hateful comments slowed. Once in a while, someone would leave a message saying they had heard about her work at the shelter or the hospital, and that it had changed their opinion of her. It wasn't a flood of praise, but it was enough to remind her that change was possible. Not just for her, but for how people saw her. Still, she knew the internet would never completely forget the gala. The clip was out there forever, and she had accepted that. But she had learned something important. She didn't have to live her life trying to erase the past. She could live in a way that made the present matter more. One evening in early spring, she received another email from Keanu's assistant. It was simple. "Mr. Reeves would like to invite you to a small charity dinner next month, if you're comfortable attending." For a moment, she felt the old nervousness return, the thought of stepping back into a room full of cameras, knowing some people might still whisper about her. But this time, she felt stronger. She replied yes when the night of the dinner came. She arrived quietly, dressed in a modest black dress. The event was smaller than the gala, more intimate, with only a few reporters allowed. Keanu greeted her warmly, just as he had at the cafe months earlier. Throughout the evening, she spoke with other guests about the shelter and hospital, sharing stories not to impress, but to inspire support. A few people who had only known her from the viral video looked surprised at how different she was from what they had expected. At one point, Keanu pulled her aside and said, "I'm glad you came. I've heard about the work you've been doing. I think you found something real." She smiled, feeling a quiet sense of gratitude. "I think I have too," she replied. By the end of the night, she realized something had changed deep inside her. The fear that had once controlled her steps was gone. The need to be seen had been replaced by the desire to do something meaningful. Weeks later, she was back at the shelter, cleaning kennels as usual, when one of the younger volunteers asked, "Didn't you used to be famous?" Amelia laughed softly. "Not in any way that matters," she said, handing the volunteer a fresh towel. She knew then that her life wasn't about repairing her old image anymore. It was about building a new one defined by kindness, patience, and the simple act of showing up. The internet might always remember her as the girl from the gala, but the people who saw her now, in the shelter, in the hospital, in everyday life, would remember her for something else entirely. And that, she decided, was enough.